I may really badly want to do a plein air painting, whether it's snow or even a thunderstorm. Sometimes the weather just isn't cooperating, so I'll have to do my painting indoors. But even indoors, we can still get inspired and paint. So I pick a subject to paint, and in this case, I'm choosing the ocean because I've always been drawn to the sea. And I take to my computer to begin designing a composition. I'm using GIMP here. It's a lot like Photoshop. It's a free download on your computer digital editing program, and I am painting out ideas. And here is a digital tonal painting I've created of a subject that I want to paint, and here I've added color to it. Now that we have our design, we can project it directly onto our canvas using a digital projector and then sketch it on. To do that, we're gonna need some oil paint, so I go out to the freezer and get it. The freezer is where I keep my leftover oil paint, just because I don't like to waste any. As you know, paint can be expensive. So to do the sketch, we're going to use a number 2 synthetic bristle round brush. And let's take a look at our palette that we're going to be using today. First, we have titanium white. We got some lemon yellow, some yellow ochre. There we have viridian hue. We have some sky blue, ultramarine blue, and I like to use a little bit of phthalo blue as well, along with burnt umber and burnt sienna. And finally, we have some crimson. And I am using Master's Touch and also the brand called Reeves for my oil paints. And to start, I'll take my brush and dip it in just a little bit of linseed oil. Linseed oil is a medium that helps the flow of your paint. And we're going to be using some burnt sienna to put the sketch on to our toned canvas, which is toned with burnt sienna. And as you can see, I am basically just tracing out the image. Now, all that you really need to do at this point is just make sure that you are mapping out the major features of your painting in relation to one another. Just putting them on where they're supposed to be. You can see I'm putting on the clouds here. All I'm doing is outlining the bank of clouds. I'm not necessarily needing to put a lot of detail on. I'm just making sure that everything that I want to be there is there. And a great way to tell whether or not you're doing it the right way is just put your hand in front of the projector, and that way you can see everything without the projector shining on it. And it's a great way to tell whether or not you like it. Alright, so we're ready to actually start painting now. We're going to put the block in on first, and to do that I'm going to grab a little bit of linseed oil and mix a color for the background sky, because we're going to start with what is furthest away in our composition and paint our way forward. And you can see I'm using a little bit of a bigger brush here. That's just because I want to make sure that I cover ground quickly and not get bogged down in detail, so a larger brush helps me do that. And you can see I'm starting with titanium white and a little bit of phthalo blue for that background sky. I'm also going to grab a little bit of burnt sienna, which will knock down the saturation of that blue and just make it a little bit more gray and a little bit more moody. That is what I want for right now. When it comes to color mixing, all I really do is I go by my instincts, and if I apply a color and it doesn't look right, I will go back to my palette and mix it just a little bit and tweak the color, keeping general principles in mind, such as white tends to desaturate a color, adding a color's opposite will gray out whatever color you're mixing, etc. I keep those basic principles in mind, and I just tweak my mixtures until I get them the way I want them as I apply them on the canvas. Let's take another look at the digital painting that I created for the design. Now I know that the painting itself isn't going to look exactly like the digital painting, and the digital painting is in its own right a unique work of art, but I'm using this as my reference photo going forward. I will be probably showing it a few times as we progress with the painting, and I did have it on my laptop so that I could continually refer back to it as I put the block in on. If you have a reference photo, I think you'll find it is very helpful, especially if you have something specific in mind that you want to paint. Now I'm going to be mixing a color for the clouds, and I added a little bit of some of that crimson, and we're going to be using our big flathead brush that we've been using this whole time for the block-in to mix a color for those clouds. I'm starting off with a pink, but I want it to be a nice lavender color that is just a little bit higher in value than the sky around it. And it looks complicated, but believe me, I am keeping it very simple at this stage in the painting. And now we're going to take another look at our reference photo overlaid over the painting, just so that you can catch a glimpse of how I'm trying to get it to look. And here I'm adding some of that yellow ochre just so that I can get a little bit more of a flavor of orange in those clouds, so that I can have a nice contrast of warm clouds to cool background sky. I'm not really going to carry that orange over too much to the right. That's mainly going to be for those clouds up at the top left. And here I'm taking a little bit of a darker blue color that's very similar to our sky color, and I'm adding in some shadows underneath those clouds to give the impression of maybe there is a storm front moving in over the ocean. And it also adds depth as well as creates that convincing sense of light in the background sky. Still keeping it very simple though, that is not hard to do. And here I am adding in the tiniest sliver of dark blue to indicate the background ocean stretching out behind these breaking waves coming into the coast. I'd like to talk a little bit now about getting inspired for doing a painting. Because with this particular seascape, I had an artist that I had recently, I guess, rediscovered, who lived back in the 1800s, I believe. His name was Frederick Judd Wall, and he did a lot of beautiful seascapes that I was looking at and really getting inspired by and enjoying. So I think it is important to find inspiration before you do your painting, just obviously because it will help carry you through the painting process, but it also provides you with direction going forward in your painting. Along with the reference photo that I had created myself for my painting that I was going off of, I also had a file on my laptop of Frederick's seascape paintings that I could bring up and look at anytime I either needed some of that inspiration, or also I would look at it for some framework for how to paint maybe the movement of water or the spray of water. And you really learn a lot when you have multiple images that you can draw from, especially from artists that you admire. So when you're doing a painting, I think it is also good to not only have a reference photo that you're going off of specifically, but also a little bit more vaguely and in general be looking at other paintings that are similar that can help you get through a little bit of artist block if you run into it, because you'll be able to look at other people's work and see how they overcame issues that might arise in your paintings. Here you see me painting in those sea rocks with the same brush I've been using this whole time for the block-in, which is the synthetic bristled flathead brush. And I'm painting in the shadows first with a very dark color that I mixed from, I believe it was phthalo blue and burnt umber. You can also substitute the phthalo blue for ultramarine blue, but I find that the phthalo blue kind of just makes it a little bit darker. And now I am painting in the more highlighted portions of the rock, and that color was a warm gray that can be created by mixing any of those browns we have, like the burnt sienna or the burnt umber, with some of that blue to gray it out. You could use sky blue, I think that's what I used, and that creates a nice gray. But if you want it to be warmer, obviously you keep a little bit more of the browns dominant in the mixture, and then you can play around with the values of that mixture by adding titanium white, which you have to be careful because I find that the titanium white tends to desaturate it. So if you have it a little bit more warm with those dominant browns in the mixture, if you add titanium white, it can kind of kill that warmth a little bit. So just be aware of that. And the block-in is finished at this point, so I'm moving into the modeling stage where I add a little bit more detail and render the image a little bit more. But I'm still not thinking super detailed, so I don't need to get out a brush that is really small. Although, as you see here, I did move on to a smaller brush. This is the same brush, I'm pretty sure, that I used for the sketch. Another thing that I like to do when I'm painting like this, which I think is very helpful, is sometimes I will stop the painting, sit down, and just look at the painting and study it. I will often compare it in these moments to my reference photo, just looking back and forth to see how it is progressing. And often I will find changes I want to make that are not even according to the reference photo that I'm following. And here you see me making one of those changes. I wanted to add a little bit more of the darker water to the inside of the curl of that wave there. So I still have a lot of that white water on the curl of the wave, but I wanted to add a little bit more definition to that wave by putting in that darker water. And now I am revisiting those rocks, starting with the shadows and adding a little bit more detail to them. I am taking the shadow color and I'm painting in cracks in the rock now, and I'm adding a little bit more structure and shape to those rocks, making them look a little bit more 3D, which you obviously will get better at creating rock shapes the more you paint. But one thing for me, I noticed I started getting better at it when I came at it in a little bit more simplified way. Before, I would try to get a little bit too cheeky with it, and what I mean by that is I would try too hard, and it's really more simple than that. When I started to loosen up and paint a little bit more freely and loosely, I found that my rock shapes started to come alive, and I could see them better, I could imagine them better, and therefore plot them in better. I hope that makes sense. If I were to boil that statement down, I would say that before, when I wasn't very good at painting rocks, I would be getting too complicated and too close up and tight when I should have been stepping back and looking at the big picture a little bit more. And when I started to do that, I simplified and I stepped back and I looked more at the big picture instead of my individual brush strokes. I could see the rocks better, and it helped me paint them in because I could see the pattern. I could see the rocks before I painted them. And that is kind of, I think, what you want to look for when you're painting things like ocean rocks or anything else, really. I would start with some very simple strokes, and the more strokes I put in, the more I could see, oh, this kind of looks like that, or it kind of looks like the rock is sitting at this angle, and therefore it would become much easier to paint because I would just keep building off of the information that I had laid down, which started very simply. Now, around this point in the painting, which we're very close to the end, we're almost ready to start the detail phase, I started to realize I wanted to have a shadow in the foreground, and I wanted that wave in the middle ground to be highlighted, as you can see with this example picture. That was something that I wanted to do that was a major change even to the composition. But it was a very simple one. I waited until the painting was dry, and that took about a few days. Then I was able to go over the top of a dry painting with a clean brush and apply those highlights and shadows without disturbing what I had already laid down. And really the only place that I added shadows was up in the top left-hand corner where you see me putting in just a little bit more under the crash of the wave. That area was highlighted previously, so that was the only area I had to dull down and add shadows over the top of. Because the foreground is already in a nice shadowy state, I don't need to add any more dark values to the foreground. And right there, I am darkening the rock just a little bit up at the corner there so that it stands proud of the background water and is a little bit more distinguishable. And now I'm taking some highlight color, which is not pure titanium white yet. It's a very, very light color, which is basically just titanium white with a little bit of those grays mixed in, just a little bit. That way we can define the movement of the water a little bit better. And I don't want to put it all over the crashing wave here. I just want to put it in a few select areas to add a little bit more shape to it. As you can imagine, the sun is shining down over a cliff and hitting those spots of the middle ground. And now we're going to take our pure titanium white and add in those conserved highlight touches of impasto marks that are going to really make the painting pop, where the light is hitting this water directly. So this is the fun point, because I have my shadows, I have my midtones, and now the highlights are going to go over the top of that and create the shapes of the white water. I can create those bubbly, foamy shapes, and I can create little waves and splashes by adding these marks in that will really make the painting come alive. And I think a good tip for creating those convincing shapes that convey the movement of the water would be very similar to the one I gave when you are doing the same thing for creating those convincing rock shapes. I would say take your cues from what is already laid down and let that inspire you to create the shapes. Let what you already have laid down inspire you and inform where to put the highlights. And with that, the painting is now complete. Let's take a brief look at the strategies that we learned in this video on how to create our own masterpiece. Number one, we're gonna need to create a design first. Whether you do that like I did on the computer digitally, or you just wanna sketch it out on paper, that's fine. Create your idea and plan it out beforehand. Number two, transfer your plan to the canvas. You can do that using a grid. You can do it like I did with a digital projector. I even think you could do it just by eyeballing it. However you choose to do it, make sure that you get it very exact to your plan that you created beforehand. After that, we're ready to start painting. And remember, start out very simple and then end up more complex. Don't get ahead of yourself. All right, guys, I hope that was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate your thumbs up and your subscribing to the channel. I like to do a video every week or every 2 weeks. I do a lot of plein air paintings, and I do like to do studio works as well. But yeah, click the bell icon if you want to be notified every time one of those videos comes out. We'll catch you guys in the next one, and until then, God bless y'all. We'll see you later.